So slat walls make great feature walls. We all know that. They look really cool, but they could look cooler. And today we're going to supercharge them with built-in LEDs. I'll show you how to install slat wall panels on the wall and how you can build in your LEDs. Before we look at installing any LED lights, the first thing we need to do is install our slat wall. We're going to be doing a slat wall feature wall all the way along the length of this wall from top to bottom. Now these panels are 2.4 meters in height and we need to cut them down so that we can position them on the wall and work out where they need to go on the wall before we fix them in place. So using a tape measure, I'll take a simple measurement from the top of the skirting board to the bottom of the coving, and you want this measurement to be nice and tight because you don't want to see any gaps above or below the panel. Just because it's one measurement one end doesn't necessarily mean it'll be the same the other. So take lots of different measurements for each individual panel because you don't want to end up cutting one too short. I'll just use a pencil to make a little mark, and now I'm just using a straight edge to draw a line all the way across the panel. Now the aim is to minimize splintering. We want to make a nice clean cut. In case that doesn't happen, I'd recommend making your cut at the bottom of the panel rather than the top along the coving, because if it's at the top it's more visible. So make sure your cuts are at the bottom. Now bearing in mind the panels are different on both sides. You've got a tongue of felt on the bottom edge here and no felt on the top here. Now you need to take that into account when you're doing your cuts, because if you want your cut at the bottom, of course if your tongue ends up the other way around, your cut could end up at the top. So do a little bit of planning before you start cutting. I'm going to use my circular saw with a good quality finishing blade on it. Now this Nesdell is a brand new blade, so it's nice and sharp. I'm just cutting along that line that I made, making sure to be nice and accurate because we want a nice straight cut. So the first panel's cut, and what we're going to do now is put it in position and check for plumb. So what we need to do, grab a level, and we can already tell we're going to have a slight problem because if we look at this wall here, it's actually very slightly out. So with the panel pushed hard against that wall, you can see that we are not perfectly plumb. So we'll bring this panel over a bit so it's perfectly plumb, and what we're going to see, we've got a bit of a gap appearing. Now that is going to look unsightly. Now if we plumb it up and leave a gap like that, it's going to look awful. So we've got two choices. We can either put a bit of masking tape on the wall there and paint a very small black strip on the wall so that you wouldn't see it by the time you've installed the panel, but the better way to do it is to trim the felt. So we're going to trim a little bit off the felt, a little sliver at the bottom, so that we can plumb the panel up and get rid of that gap. So it'll be about 5 mil all the way to nothing at the top of the panel. We'll just trim that off and we will eliminate that gap. Now if you're not comfortable with doing that, go with the matte black paint method. You will not see it. And if we now pop the panel back in place, we should find it's nice and plumb. So we're good to go. We can get this one fixed in position. You can use these things, drywall screws, the same things you'd use to put plasterboard on a wall. Now the reason you'd use these is because of course they're painted black, and by the time you've screwed these through the panel into the wall, you wouldn't see the head. I've used this method before when I've been fixing into a stud wall. I've just gone through and fixed straight into the studs behind. Now be very careful if you use this method that you don't hit any pipes or cables, but there is a safer, quicker and easier way than these things to fix this to the wall. A good quality contact adhesive. Use that on the back of the panel to fix the panel to the wall. So I've flipped the panel round, and all I'm going to do is put some little circles of the adhesive on the back of the board. Now you don't want to use anything, don't want to lose that on the carpet. Now you don't want to use pink grip, grip fill, any of those types of adhesives because they skin over and they go quite hard. This stuff is going to squash out and give us a bit better of a grab initially whilst it goes off. So we've got our adhesive on the back, and now we're just going to lift our panel in place. Once that panel is positioned, we'll just pat it back to the wall, and once it goes off, it'll go rock hard and that panel will not go anywhere. Now our next panel, you can see, it's got a socket right in the middle of it. So what we need to do is measure out for that socket, and we're going to cut round it so that it looks nice in the panel. We want that cut to be nice and neat. So to position sockets and things that you want to cut around on your board, the easiest way is to take a series of measurements. Now we know that our next board butts up against this one, so all I'll do is take a measurement from the edge of the panel to the edge of the socket. I'll do that all the way around the socket, and I'll also measure from the skirting to the top of the socket and to the bottom of the socket. Then using my pencil and tape measure, I'm transferring those marks onto the panel. Don't worry, I'm not cutting the socket out with a handsaw. Saws double up as squares. So we can use our saw on the edge of the panel to make sure that we get a nice square cut. So you can see I've marked out for my socket. Now precision here is key. It kind of goes without saying, you're only going to get one go at this per panel. So I'm going to put my drill bit through on each corner where the lines meet. And the only real reason I do that is to give myself a mark on the other side of the panel. Now if we bring our square back in, we can join those holes up, grab our sharp knife again and cut the felt between the two holes. Now we should be able to push that piece of felt out. This bit's got a few staples in, so you might have to persuade it. Next, flip the panel over, put your jigsaw blade between the slats. You'll then be able to make your cut. Of course that does damage the edges very slightly, so we're going to sand them down in a minute, but you can see that some of these slats have now only got one staple in, so they're all loose. So what I'm going to do is just straighten them back up, so we'll just get them nice and flush on the bottom, straighten them up, and then from the other side we're just going to use a staple gun and just staple them back in position. Now I've just got a little bit of sandpaper. I'm just going to tidy up all those edges. You could bring the socket face forward so it's flush with the panel. To do that, the metal back box behind, you'd bring that forward so you could pack it out, and then so that you don't see the metal through the slats, what you could do is wrap it in some black duct tape, something like that, so that you don't see that metal box when you look down on the top of it. For me, I'm not too worried. They go behind bedside units, so I haven't spent the time doing it, but if you do want these to look a bit better, that is how I would do it. Now, just like before, we can apply our adhesive. Now what you saw before when we fitted the last panel is that these boards have a larger tongue one side than they do on the other, and what we're going to do is butt that tongue up to the previous panel. So we're going to lift the board in position just like that, and then we're going to just push it up very slightly and make sure it's butted up to the previous panel, and that way you won't see any difference between all the gaps and it'll look like one complete panel. Two panels up, all we've got to do now is continue working our way along the wall, cutting around sockets and anything that might be in the way until we get to the last panel, and I'll show you how we fit that one, and then we can move on to some lighting. Now before we do any of that stuff, if you're not already a subscriber, make sure you subscribe, because if you subscribe that allows me to make better content for you guys, and hit the like button because that helps this video reach and help more people like yourself. So let's get the rest of this wall done, and then I'll show you how we cut the last panel and get some lights in this thing. Now we need to cut the width of our last board. This wall is plumb. If the wall's not plumb, I'd advise that you take 3 measurements, one at the top, one at the middle and one at the bottom, and we need to cut this panel to the exact size of this gap here. So I've transferred that measurement onto the board, and I'm just making a nice line on there so that I can rip this board, run my circular saw all the way down it. If you've got a track saw, even better, or a table saw, you can get an even straighter cut. If your final measurement falls on the felt, even better. Stanley knife, straight edge, nice clean cut on the felt. That's the last piece of the puzzle in, and that is how you install a slat wall, but we're not done yet. Now we can move on to the fun bit, fitting the lights. Now, there's a bed that goes here. You can probably tell that by the 2 sockets. And these things that I'm installing are going to be the best reading lights that you've ever seen. So, what we're going to do now is take a look at what lights we're putting in this slat wall. So this kit is called the Black Aura from LED Space. Now, for complete transparency, LED Space sent me this kit for these panels, free of charge. They provided the kit for the video. So what we got in the box, the power supply and the connection leads for each LED strip. That's actually quite big, a little bit bigger than I expected, so you're going to need to hide this behind furniture. We have the controller, which I'm assuming, the controller, this is what happens when you don't read instructions. Controller goes there, and these break off to each LED strip. Now the remote's really slick. check that out. You can put it on the wall, has a little magnet. And we've got 4 of the light strips. Now, these are the bits you're probably going to be most interested in. They are black when they're installed. You can't actually see them in the panel, so they're hidden. So you'll maintain that nice look during the day, and then they're going to light up and provide that light for us at night. The LED strips are cuttable. So what I'm going to do is measure out the height that I need. So once you know the length you need, if you look at the back of the strip, you'll faintly see there's some little marks every 20 millimeters, and they're the positions in which you can cut the strip to length. Now I've got 4 of these light strips. Now I'm going to cut the other 3 down to the same length, but of course you don't have to. You could create an effect on the wall if you wanted to, where you had some random lengths or shorter lengths, entirely up to you. But I think I would probably develop an OCD if I cut these to random lengths, so I'm going to cut them all the same. So we've got the length of the lights. Now the positioning of them is a very personal choice. So the length for this wall is 350. What I'm going to do is divide that by 5, and that will give me 4 positions where I can have my 4 lights. So to install it, select the slat that you want to install it within. Now these strips will fit in any panel built or bought that have 13mm wide slats and 8mm deep slats. Start at the top. It's easier to start at the top than it is at the bottom, and then we're going to push that strip into the slat. Now you'll notice that we're pushing it in the direction that looks backwards. So on the bottom you've got the light strip, on the top all you see is black. Now it seems a little bit strange because you'd think it'd go that way around. It doesn't. It goes the way around with the black part facing outwards. Now of course the reason for that is they look invisible. I'm assuming, I don't know what it looks like on the camera, but I'm assuming you can't really see where that is now. So push it in, push it as flat as you possibly can get it, and I'll carry that on all the way to the bottom of the skirting board, and I can run the cable to the power supply behind the bed. Now of course, if you want to do this other ways, you can. And of course the aim is really to just hide either the cable or the strip so that you can't see it during the day. So one thing to consider is that there are quite a few cables to hide, so you're going to need furniture or a place to hide these cables. You might have to get a little bit creative with that, but let's stand back and have a look at the finished product. These look cool in the daytime when they're off, and in the night time when they're on. Now I've got a link, I'll pop it in the description so you can grab some if you want some, but let me know what you guys think. Do you prefer a slat wall with them, or do you prefer a slat wall without them? And I hope this has given you a bit of inspiration and you've enjoyed it. If you have, check out one of these because you're bound to like them as well. And I'll see you guys in the next one.